In this section, we are going to focus on implementing our user authentication. We used the previous section to set up the registration process and took the advantage to set up the actions, the data, and override some of the steps for migration and models in Laravel. So that gives us a good structure to continue to build our application on. So from this section, we are going to actually dive into building our application, starting with authentication. We are going to implement Laravel Sanctum to generate personal access tokens for API authentication. We are going to look at user login and logout. We are going to look at verifying user email addresses before they can actually proceed to doing other things in the application. Now, Laravel Sanctum is a very lightweight version of Laravel Passport, which issues authentication tokens to users in the front end. It allows us to quickly create authentication for single-page applications, for mobile applications, as well as for third-party front-end applications that want to use our system. And so we will be using one of these methods to create our authentication. Now, the first way is a single-page application authentication. If your front end is actually going to be hosted on the same domain as your back end, which means it's a first-party single-page application, you can go with this option. And the way this option works is it actually uses Laravel's sessions in the back end, because you do see here that we install it and we activate a middleware called ensure front end requests are stateful, which means that every request that you make from the front end is actually considered a stateful request, and Laravel captures and stores a session for you in the back end, which is all handled by this middleware. This is good if, again, you don't intend to use this for mobile application development. You want your front end to be hosted on the same domain as your back end. You can go with that option. And the requirement for that is each time you send a request to an endpoint that requires this authentication, you need to get what we call the cross-site request forgery token, which you request from the back end. Laravel will issue that to you, and that is sent back with every other request that is coming in the system. For our use case, we will not be using this middleware at all. We will go with the other option, which is the option for issuing personal access tokens. And that works like using JWT or JSON Web Tokens. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to create an API that we can also use for mobile devices without having to customize a second authentication system for that mobile device. So I want to go with just issuing personal access tokens, but we are going to do this in a secure way so that the access tokens are actually sent to the front end using cookies, and we'll call them HTTP only cookies. And that will allow us to capture the cookies in the front end and send them back to the back end with every request that requires authentication without exposing those cookies for cross-site scripting. Okay, we are going to be talking about that in detail going forward. But the whole idea is we want to be able to issue authentication tokens or personal access tokens to users. And once those tokens are issued to the user, we will send them with every request that requires authentication. And then Laravel will use that to identify who the user is and whether they're authorized to access the system. So let's step into the next lesson and actually install the Laravel Sanctum package and implement functionality for authentication.